Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works by now. You guys request a topic, and we dig deep into the latest news and reports.
That's right. We gather all the articles, research papers, even some ads that catch our eye.
Exactly. And today we're taking a closer look at everything happening in India and around the world. So much is going on, it can feel a bit overwhelming to keep up with it all, right?
Definitely. And that's where we come in. We sift through the noise and highlight the most interesting and important stuff. So you can stay informed without getting bogged down in information overload.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Something that really stood out to me was Prime Minister Modi's speech at the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas event.
Oh, yeah, and Bhubaneswar.
Yeah, he was talking about the importance of documenting the history of the Indian diaspora. And it got me thinking, why haven't we done more of this already? These stories are fascinating, and they're part of our shared heritage.
It's true. He actually gave a really compelling example. He talked about families who migrated from Gujarat to Oman over 250 years ago. Their journey, their struggles, their triumphs, it's all part of the rich tapestry of Indian history. And it's a story that deserves to be told.
It makes you wonder how many other untold stories are out there, just waiting to be discovered and shared with the world.
Exactly. And these stories aren't just about the past. They can also teach us valuable lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the interconnectedness of cultures in today's globalized world.
Now, speaking of things that are interconnected, let's talk about the political landscape in India. Things seem to be heating up, especially with the Delhi Assembly elections coming up.
Oh, yeah. The NDA bloc is facing some internal turmoil right now with the Samajwadi Party and the Trinamool Congress choosing to support the AAP over the Congress.
And then you have Omar Abdullah questioning the whole point of the alliance if it's just about winning the 2024 Lok Sabha elections.
It raises some interesting questions about the long-term viability of these kinds of political partnerships. Can they really hold together when there are so many different agendas and priorities at play?
It's definitely a situation to watch closely. Okay, let's move on to some big developments from the Supreme Court. There were two rulings that really caught my attention. One on same-sex marriage and the other about the creamy layer concept in FCSD reservations.
Right. The same-sex marriage ruling has sparked a lot of debate and strong emotions. The court decided to uphold the denial of legal recognition for same-sex marriage, which was a major setback for LGBTQ+ advocates who have been fighting for equal rights.
It makes you think about the pace of social change and how sometimes it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step back.
And then there's that judgment about the creamy layer concept within SCST reservations. This is essentially about looking at economic status within those communities and potentially excluding those who are deemed to have reached a certain level of economic well-being from affirmative action benefits.
So it's about refining the focus of these policies to make sure they're reaching those who need them the most. It's a complex issue with potentially far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, it raises questions about how we define social equity and whether economic advancement should disqualify someone from benefiting from programs designed to address historical injustices.
It's a debate that's likely to continue for some time. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about the economy. The news seems to be filled with talk about a slowdown these days.
There are definitely signs of a slowdown. Experts are pointing to a decline in private investment and consumer spending as key factors driving this trend.
And I read that the IMF is actually recommending that India improve its data collection and analysis methods for more accurate economic assessments. So even the numbers themselves are up for debate.
That's right. We need to be critical consumers of economic data and look beyond the headlines to understand the nuances of what's really happening.
So what does all this talk about a slowdown actually mean for people like me? Should I be worried about my job or my investments?
It's definitely something to pay attention to. A slowdown can impact various aspects of the economy, but it's important to remember that economic cycles are natural.
Okay, that's somewhat reassuring. Now, speaking of economic ups and downs, I read that the government actually overestimated those gold and silver import bills because of a system error.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a glitch during the data migration process when they were trying to move the SEC's trade reporting onto the IceGate system.
It just goes to show how complex these systems are and how even small mistakes can have big consequences.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for robust data management and verification processes to ensure accuracy and transparency.
Now, in other financial news, I saw that the Indian Overseas Bank is selling off a big chunk of its bad loans.
That's right. They're looking to get rid of about 11,500 crore of non-performing assets by selling them to asset reconstruction companies. This is a common strategy for banks trying to clean up their balance sheets.
And on a more positive note, Tata Consultancy Services actually reported a 12% increase in net profit this quarter, reaching a whopping 12,380 crore.
That's definitely a good sign for the IT sector, and maybe even sign of broader economic resilience.
Okay, let's shift gears now and talk up something a bit more somber. I came across a story about a journalist investor named Mukesh Chandrakar who was murdered after exposing corruption in road construction.
This case is a tragic reminder of the dangers journalists face, especially those who are working to expose wrongdoing and hold those in power accountable.
It makes you wonder what more can be done to protect journalists and ensure that they can do their jobs without fear of reprisal.
It's a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach. We need stronger legal protections for journalists, better training and support for law enforcement, and a cultural shift that values a free and independent press.
Absolutely. A society without a free press is a society in danger. So let's move on to a topic that's a bit more hopeful. I read this really interesting article about the need for better accessibility rules in India. It was talking about how we need clear, practical guidelines that cater to the needs of all kinds of people, including people with disabilities, older adults, even parents pushing strollers.
It's a really important issue. The article introduces this concept of universal design, which basically means designing things from the start with everyone in mind.
I love that idea. So instead of trying to retrofit things after the fact, we should be thinking about accessibility from the very beginning.
Exactly. And the beauty of universal design is that it often benefits everyone, not just those with specific needs. For example, curb cuts that were originally designed for wheelchair users also make it easier for people with strollers or luggage to navigate sidewalks.
That's such a great point. It shows how accessibility can actually drive innovation and create a more inclusive environment for everyone.
It's about recognizing that we all have different needs and abilities, and designing our world in a way that accommodates those differences, rather than excluding them.
This has been a fantastic start to our deep dive. We've gone from diaspora history and political shakeups to economic trends and calls for a more accessible world. I can't wait to see what other insights we uncover in the next part of our exploration.
Me too. There's still so much to discuss.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back soon with part 2 of your deep dive into today's news.
Welcome back to your deep dive. It's great to be back with you. Ready to dig into some more news?
Yeah, tons to talk about. Still so much happening. Let's start with that whole debate about India maybe granting dual citizenship to its diaspora. It's pretty complex, right?
Definitely a lot of layers to consider. On the one hand, it seems like a natural way to recognize the strong connections many people have to India, even if they've built lives elsewhere.
It's true. I mean, so many people of Indian origin feel deeply connected to their heritage. But then you start thinking about the practicalities, like how would voting work? And what about things like allegiance in times of conflict?
Right. It gets complicated fast. And those complications were actually highlighted in some recent comments from External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar.
Yeah, he basically said that while the overseas citizenship of India card is a step in the right direction, the debate about full-blown dual citizenship is still very much alive.
Which makes you wonder if it'll actually happen. I mean, there's some strong opinions out there. Amitabh Mattu and Vivek Kachhu has some interesting things to say about it. They both kind of weighed in on the issue, but it seems like they have slightly different perspectives.
Yeah, I remember reading that piece. They both brought up some good points. So remind me, what were their main arguments again?
Well, Kachhu really emphasized the distinction between NRIs and PIOs.
Okay, yeah. So NRIs are Indian nationals who are living abroad. They have Indian passports and all the rights that come with citizenship, except for voting outside India.
Exactly. But PIOs are persons of Indian origin. They're not Indian nationals. They don't have those same political rights. Right now, they have those OCI cards, which replace the old PIO cards, but they haven't really gained any new benefits.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
And Kachhu also said that using the term citizen for the OCI card is kind of misleading because it doesn't actually come with full political rights.
Exactly. He sees it as a bit of a misnomer. Meanwhile, Mattu seems to think that granting dual citizenship could lead to problems, especially from a political standpoint.
Right. He's worried about divided loyalties, which is understandable. I guess, true citizenship implies fully participating in the political process, including voting. And if you extend those rights to people who might have conflicting allegiances, it could get tricky.
Definitely. So, yeah, it's a really tough call. I mean, there are valid arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's a decision that India will have to make carefully, weighing all the potential benefits and risks.
It'll be interesting to see how this conversation unfolds and what direction they ultimately decide to go in.
Okay, let's move on to something a bit more concrete. Those gold and silver import bills that were overestimated. Remember, the government ended up blaming it on double counting.
It was kind of a mess. It seems like a system error. They've been working on migrating SEZ's trade reporting onto that new ice skate system.
Right.
But it sounds like both the old and new systems ended up sending data to the Commerce Ministry, and some of that data was overlapping, which led to inflated import figures.
So basically, a bureaucratic snafu with a pretty hefty price tag. Pretty much. But the good thing is that the government has acknowledged the mistake, and they're working on fixing it. It just highlights how complex these systems can be and how important it is to have checks and balances in place.
No kidding. Now, for something completely different, Haryana is about to become the first state to implement those 3 new criminal laws. Remember we talked about those in part 1?
Oh yeah, big changes coming. And they're moving fast. They're aiming to have them in place by the end of February. These new laws are basically replacing the old Indian Penal Code, the Indian Evidence Act, and the Code of Criminal Procedure.
That's a pretty significant overhaul. What's the reasoning behind this move?
Well, the Director General of Police, Shatrajit Kapoor, he's been talking about how 5G technology is a game changer in this context. The new laws really emphasize digital evidence, like video recordings of crime scenes. And with the speed and connectivity of 5G, it'll be much easier to collect and manage all that data.
That's fascinating. It feels like we're entering a whole new era of law enforcement where technology plays an even bigger role.
Absolutely.
Right.
But like with any technological advancement, there are questions about privacy, security, and the potential for misuse. It's a balancing act.
Now, I wanted to talk about a legal case that caught my eye. It's the one where the Rajasthan High Court cautioned against using Section 152 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita to stifle dissent. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that was an important ruling. Section 152 makes it a crime to endanger the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India.
Right. But the court's concern is that the law doesn't really define what endangerment means. It's too vague.
So the worry is that it could be used to silence anyone who criticizes the government or expresses views that are seen as unpatriotic.
Exactly. They even compared it to the old sedition law, which was recently suspended because it was so often misused to suppress dissent.
It's a tricky situation, trying to find that balance between national security and freedom of speech.
It is. And it's ultimately up to the judiciary to ensure that the line isn't crossed. You know, this actually ties into something we were discussing earlier, accessibility. I came across another legal case that really highlighted the need for clearer accessibility guidelines, especially in the digital world. It was talking about how the definition of accessibility needs to evolve as technology evolves.
Right. They called it a shifting threshold of accessibility, which I thought was a great way to put it. As we move into a world of AI, the Internet of Things, all this cutting-edge stuff, our understanding of accessibility and the tools we need to ensure inclusivity have to adapt as well.
It's true. We can't just set a standard and forget about it. Accessibility needs to be an ongoing conversation and a continuous process of improvement.
And the case also talked about the importance of phased implementation. So it's not just about setting lofty goals, but also taking practical steps to achieve them. They talked about establishing minimum accessibility standards as a starting point.
Which makes sense. I mean, you have to start somewhere. And it's better to make incremental progress than to get bogged down in trying to achieve everything all at once.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that they actually looked at Canada's accessibility roadmap for inspiration.
Oh, yeah. Canada has a goal of full accessibility by 2040. They have these checkpoints every 5 years to track their progress. It's a good model.
It is. It shows they're serious about it.
Yeah.
And you know what I thought was really interesting? The emphasis on universal design. It's about shifting the focus from accommodating differences to creating environments that work for everyone from the start.
It's a powerful idea because it recognizes that we all experience varying levels of ability throughout our lives, whether it's due to age, a temporary injury, or even just carrying a heavy bag. There are times when we all need a little extra help.
It's so true. And the case also highlighted the importance of conducting social audits to see how effective accessibility initiatives actually are.
But they also pointed out a problem, which is that there's a lack of clear guidelines for those audits, which could lead to inconsistencies and make it hard to compare results.
Exactly. We need standardized frameworks and training to make sure those audits are thorough and actually lead to meaningful improvements.
It feels like we're at a crucial point with accessibility. The awareness is there, but we need to turn that awareness into concrete action.
I agree. And remember, creating accessible environments isn't just about ticking boxes and fulfilling legal obligations. It's about building a more inclusive and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to participate fully.
Well said. Okay, how about we take a break from all the serious stuff for a bit? Ready for some sports talk?
I'm always up for some sports. What have you got for us?
Well, the Australian Open is in full swing, and it looks like we might be headed for another epic showdown between Novak Djokovic and Carlos Alcaraz.
I know. They're on opposite sides of the draw, so there's a chance they could face off in the quarterfinals. That would be a dream match for tennis fans.
And don't forget about defending champion Jannik Sinner. He's a force to be reckoned with as well. Men's tennis is so exciting right now. It's anyone's game.
It is. Speaking of exciting matches, I've been really impressed with the Indian doubles pair of Satvik Rankireddy and Chirag Shetty in the Malaysia Super 1000 badminton tournament.
Oh yeah, they've been on fire. They made it to the quarterfinals, right?
They did. Their teamwork and strategy have been amazing. I'm rooting for them to go all the way.
Now for a little cricket talk, Sunil Gavaskar has come out and said he thinks Jasprit Bumrah could be a future captain for the Indian team. What do you think about that?
It's an interesting idea. Bumrah's definitely a natural leader, and he's got the respect of the team, but he's still pretty young, and his main focus is on bowling.
But Gavaskar's point is that Bumrah has that calm demeanor under pressure, which is so crucial for a captain, especially in high-stakes games like cricket.
That's true. It'll be interesting to see if he gets a chance to lead the team at some point.
And there's been a lot of discussion about Rohit Sharma's captaincy, especially after India lost the Border Gavaskar Trophy to Australia.
Yeah, his performance wasn't his best during that series. And some people are questioning whether he's the right fit for the captaincy role going forward.
It's a tough spot to be in. He's a seasoned captain with a lot of experience, but this loss has definitely put him under scrutiny.
Being the captain of the Indian cricket team comes with a lot of pressure. The expectations are always so high.
Speaking of Indian cricket, there's been a lot of talk about the future of the Test team in general.
That series loss in Australia definitely exposed some weaknesses, particularly in the batting department. There's a sense that the team needs some fresh talent and a more aggressive approach.
It does feel like there are some promising young players waiting in the wings, like Yashasvi Jaiswal, Nitya Kumar, Reddy Washington Sundar. They could bring a new energy to the team.
I think so, too. It'll be exciting to see how the team evolves over the next few years. Okay, so switching gears now, I wanted to touch on the Chennai Marathon. It really brought to light the importance of having proper medical preparedness at sporting events.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that case where a runner had a really serious medical emergency. He experienced severe hyperthermia, but thankfully the medical team was able to respond quickly and save his life.
It was a close call, and it really highlights the need for a comprehensive medical support system at these events. You need everything from basic first aid to advanced life support, because you never know what might happen.
It's true. Even seemingly healthy people can experience unexpected medical complications during strenuous activities.
And speaking of health, I wanted to bring up a study that's been generating a lot of discussion. It's about the high prevalence of hysterectomies among women in India.
Oh yeah, I read that. It was published in the AIMS Rishikesh journal, and it found that the rates were particularly high among women who do agricultural work and women in higher income groups.
It's definitely raising some concerns about whether women are being fully informed about all their treatment options before undergoing this procedure.
It's a good point. We need to make sure women are empowered to make informed decisions about their own bodies and their own health.
Absolutely. Okay, how about a little dose of culture and entertainment now? Are you ready for that?
I'm always up for some fun stuff. What's on your mind?
Well, for all the horror movie fans out there, this year marks the 100th anniversary of the iconic film Nosferatu.
Wow, a century. It's amazing how influential that film has been. I mean, the eerie visuals, the haunting story, it really set the stage for so many vampire films that came after it.
It's a true classic. And speaking of classics, the Coco World Cup is currently underway.
That's right. How's India doing?
The Indian men's team is doing well. They're being led by Pratik Waikar, who's a phenomenal player. He's a real inspiration to young athletes.
I hope they bring home the trophy. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I wanted to share a couple of quick updates from around the world. First, there's some concerning news out of Assam rescue efforts at that coal mine where 8 miners are trapped are facing some serious challenges.
Yeah, it sounds like the high water levels are making it really difficult for the rescue teams to reach the trapped miners. It's a race against time.
And on a slightly more positive note, the Gujarat High Court has granted bail to a journalist who was arrested in a GST case.
That's a win for press freedom. It's a reminder of how important it is to protect journalists who are just trying to do their job.
It has been another whirlwind tour through the news today. We've covered everything from dual citizenship and legal rulings to the latest in sports and global events.
We have. I'm looking forward to the final part of our deep dive. We still have some fascinating topics to explore.
I know, me too. It's going to be a good one.
We'll see you soon for the final part of your deep dive.
Welcome back to the show. You ready to wrap up our deep dive into the news?
Absolutely. Got some really interesting things to talk about before we finish up.
Great. Well, let's jump right in. One topic that caught my eye was shareholder activism. It sounds kind of intense. To be honest, I'm not even sure I fully understand what it means.
It's actually pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's basically when shareholders in a company decide to use their power to influence the company's decisions.
Okay, so instead of just sitting back and collecting dividends, they actually try to make a difference.
Exactly. They can use their voting rights to push for changes in the company's strategy or management, or they can speak out about issues they care about.
So they're like activists, but within the company itself.
That's a good way to put it. And it can be really effective. There's a case going on right now with NMDC, which is a state-owned mining company. And some of the shareholders are pushing for some pretty big changes.
Oh, wow. Like what?
Well, for one thing, they want NMDC to set up a subsidiary in Gifty City, which is a financial hub in Gujarat. They also want the company to open offices in Dubai and Australia.
So they're basically trying to push NMDC to expand globally and become more competitive on an international level.
Exactly. It's a great example of how shareholder activism can really shake things up and force companies to adapt.
It's a reminder that companies aren't just accountable to their CEOs and boards, they also have to listen to their shareholders.
Absolutely. Now, switching gears a bit, there's a report I wanted to share with you. It's about declining birth rates in developed countries.
Yeah.
It's something that's been on my mind lately, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that I've seen headlines about it, but I haven't really given it much thought. I guess I always figured it was a temporary thing.
It's actually a trend that's been going on for a while, and it's raising some concerns about the long-term implications for these countries.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. I mean, if fewer babies today means fewer workers and consumers down the road, what are some of the reasons behind this trend?
Well, the report points to several factors. Things like changing social norms, greater access to education and contraception, and economic pressures all seem to be playing a role. As societies become more developed, people have more options. They're choosing to have fewer children, or they're delaying parenthood.
It's like people are trying to find that balance between their personal goals and the needs of society.
Exactly. It's a complex issue with no easy solutions.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that policymakers and governments need to be thinking about.
Okay, let's move on to something a bit more positive. I was really excited to read about India completing that massive database of 10,000 human genomes.
It's a huge accomplishment. And it has the potential to revolutionize healthcare in India. The database represents people from all different parts of the country, so it's incredibly valuable for medical research and drug development.
It sounds like we're on the cusp of some major breakthroughs in personalized medicine and disease prevention.
I think so too. But of course, with any kind of scientific advancement that involves personal data, there are also concerns about privacy and ethics.
That's true. We have to make sure this data is used responsibly and that people's privacy is protected.
Absolutely. We need to have strong safeguards in place and make sure this technology is used for the benefit of all.
You know, this brings us back to something we've talked about throughout this deep dive accessibility, and it reminds me of the question you posed at the end of part 2. How do we make sure that as technology continues to advance, we don't leave anyone behind?
That's the key question, isn't it? Technology has the power to be incredibly transformative. It can connect people, break down barriers, and create opportunities. But it can also exacerbate existing inequalities if we're not careful.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of accessibility and inclusivity from the very beginning when we're designing and developing new technologies.
So it's not just about adding accessibility features as an afterthought. It's about making inclusivity a core principle of the design process.
Absolutely. We need to involve diverse voices in the development process, create clear ethical guidelines, and hold tech companies accountable for building products and services that are accessible to everyone.
It's about creating a future where technology empowers everyone, not just a select few.
I love that idea, and I think it's something we can achieve if we all work together and keep pushing for progress.
Well said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the news. It's been an incredible journey. We've covered so much ground, from politics and economics to social issues and technology.
We have. And I hope our listeners have found it informative and engaging.
I'm sure they have. It's been a real pleasure discussing these topics with you.
Likewise, I always enjoy our conversations.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive, and we encourage you to keep exploring these topics and keep the conversation going.
Stay curious, everyone. That's what it's all about.
Until next time.